having a chat.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Led by Life podcast. We're your host. I'm Rafaela, and this is Hannah. And we've come together today to just have a conversation of like where we're at. Hannah and I met through our shared love of human design and wanting to go deeper into exploring our talking body graphs or our body graphs and the gene keys. And so, life led us together to create a podcast. And today we're just going to see how it goes.
Yeah, welcome everyone. We took a little bit of a break last week. We listened to our manifestor energy and felt like we needed a little bit of a break from recording. And we actually still caught up though. And we talked for like 5 hours, which is wild. And yeah, I'm just really grateful to have someone to talk to about all this stuff, and not just human design and the gene keys, but also just life and growth and everything we're going through. So I'm grateful that we can do that.
It's so funny because Travis knows that I have this today, and he said something earlier. He goes, well, you'll probably be talking to Hannah until about tomorrow, so maybe you won't be coming. And I was like, well, not all the way until tomorrow. And something that I thought about today that I don't think everybody knows or we have shared before is that Hannah and I live in two different continents.
Mm-hmm.
So I live in the US and Hannah lives in Australia. And I don't know why, but something like I thought about this today and I was like, I feel like I want to share that because we met online, through a workshop, right? But then I was thinking, like, I wonder if anyone was ever thinking, why do they do their podcast on Zoom? Like, why do we sit here and like have this kind of medium? And I don't know if anyone's thought that, but if you have, this is the reason why. It's because Hannah lives in Australia and I live in the US.
Geographically, we kind of have to.
Right.
But hopefully we'll get to meet in person one day soon. I think my sister is moving to Florida later this year, so I'm just kind of playing with the idea of maybe going to visit sometime this year or next year. So we'll get to meet in person one day, but
oh yeah, for sure.
for now.
But I will say, I guess I also brought it up because it's brought such an interesting dynamic to a friendship. Like I've never really created a friendship this way before. And over such a like the bringing together was over something so specific. I think I said that right. Like when you're younger, you can meet friends like in school or through shared sports or activities or whatever. And it's nice to know that as an adult, you can still do that as well.
Yeah. And actually, I found it really hard to make good friendships. Like friendships has been something that I've struggled with a little bit, and I'm starting to pull together the different pieces of why that might be. And I think a big part of it is the energy type. Like as a manifestor, I heard somewhere or I read somewhere yesterday that it's because we move quickly. Like we move and we change and we evolve quite quickly. So it's only natural that our relationships and our friendships do the same. And if we can have those friends who are able to keep up with us and kind of meet us in whichever new phase that we find ourselves in, then there'll be more lasting friendships. But otherwise, it is quite normal for manifestors to have friendships fall away, which has definitely been my experience. Now, I also know that you're a 2-4, Rafa, so it could be quite different for you because the 4 is all about relationships and community. And I don't have that. Like I've got this very well, I've got the 2-5 profile. So they're both very like projected energies. And anyway, what I'm trying to say is I can only think of a couple of friends in my life who I've made over the last 8, 9, 10 years maybe, who've actually really kind of stuck around. And I have a couple of friendships from my childhood, but I mean, our interests have changed, our lives have changed a lot. So it's very hard to kind of continue to relate to each other. There's still that kind of history and that friendship there from the history. But in terms of being able to kind of keep up with the things, the new things that I'm into and the new changes, I've only had a couple of friends who have been able to keep up with that, I suppose. And so it's been really
Ah,
nice and refreshing for me to make a new friendship and someone who I feel like I can actually talk to about anything. And yeah, it's been really nice.
yeah. In a way, well, you just gave me something to think about because, um, I'm this whole like being a manifestor, having that manifestor energy, which can at times move quite quickly. Um, when I'm thinking back of like how I would never say that other people couldn't keep up with me. I've never thought of like that. That's not what I'm saying. But I could see where at certain times of my life, I've had friends that I've been really close with for like a period of time, and then something will change in my life or theirs, and then it's
Mm,
like we never talk again. And um, not for any falling out or like, I mean, not on my end, not that I personally know of. Um, but I'm thinking of how some friendships just like, yeah, well, they're really close. We're kind of like on the same page, same rhythms, like same schedules even. And I think that that's like I've noticed that in myself oftentimes that I will sort of be really close to people at particular times when the scheduling more so kind of lines up to where, oh yeah, let's do this and let's do this and then let's, or go here, whatever. And life is a little different in post pandemic, I would say, like it's still very different. Um, but to go back to what you said about like needing the break and listening to sort of our energy levels and where we were at, when you go through the human design system the way that Hannah and I have chosen to, which is to like literally go all in,
deep dive.
deep dive, there's a process called the deconditioning process. And her and I have maybe alluded to it or spoken of it or talked about it in bits. But what I want to share is that it can be quite confronting, quite destabilizing, and quite challenging because essentially we're kind of looking at patterns and beliefs and behaviors and dynamics that are sort of just there from the natural conditioning that happens when we come into this world. But we're sort of taking an active approach and looking at where the areas or the dynamics of such that we don't necessarily want to play out that way. Like we don't want to play that game, play a
Mm.
different game, or just sort of embody different ways of being. And I think in us talking about it in the last couple of weeks is maybe why you and I have sort of felt so up and down in our emotions.
Yeah, it's been a really big emotional roller coaster for sure. This year, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not a lot of people talk about it. This was kind of what we were feeling last week is that human design has become this really popular system and it's getting a lot of traction and it's really fun to first discover it and to discover all these different parts of yourself and to resonate with different things and be like, yeah, that's me. And you feel really seen and you feel really like reassured in your nature. But then comes kind of the next step, I suppose, in the journey, or the next layer, which is, like you said, Rafa, the deconditioning process. Because the more you become aware of who you actually are, the more you become aware of who you're not, or the parts of you that
Mm-hmm.
aren't really yours that you've kind of picked up. And then that can bring up all kinds of emotions, that can bring up all kinds of feelings of like perhaps resentment from the way you were brought up, or resentment towards society because society doesn't, you know, necessarily honor these parts of ourselves. And so it can be really destabilizing and uncomfortable. And I feel like not many people are talking about that part of human design, or that part of the process of kind of almost going through a little bit of a period of not even knowing who you are. Like you're seeing, because it's like an identity shift. I mean, is that something that you've experienced?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like in the last couple months or so, um, as I've continued my journey with human design, that and it was almost like at the start of our podcast, actually. Like a few weeks before, I felt really like unsure of sort of who I wanted to show up as and how I wanted to show up. And yeah, this idea of like identity. And I think we started in the identity center, right? And a lot of things at that time when we were talking felt very synchronistic to the fact that I feel like how I view my identity and the way in which I would like to present myself, my identity, um, is kind of going through like a big shift, right? And maybe this has something to do with like turning 30. I don't know. I mean, we all hear and talk about like our Saturn return and everything, but honestly, I feel a little bit more like just kind of not lost, but a little bit more unsettled, like now having already turned 30 than I did when I was like leading up to turning 30. I don't know if like that's the case for you. Sorry, like it's a fly. Um, if that was the case for you, but certainly I think that as you peel back more layers of human design and you sit with it longer and you play with it and you experiment essentially with just your day-to-day habits or the way in which you process certain informations and um, learning different systems or aspects of the whole thing. I mean, it can be so layered that this this real sort of like questioning of like, all right, how am I showing up can happen. And I feel like that is certainly either happening. Say that again.
And who am I?
Yeah, right. Like, and I feel like you're absolutely right. Like, I don't see it talked about often enough. Um, because I just don't know, like, maybe that's not like the attractive aspect of it. Because I will tell you for sure, like, when you change things on a, let's call them like on a belief system level, ultimately like you're changing the way in which your body's engaging with the world. And I don't know if you felt this, but for me, like I've had different physical experiences happening, whether it's I come down with like a fever almost immediately after I make like a change which is interesting because this week, to somewhat still go into the rhythm that we've been going in of the gene keys, this week would be gene key 6, which is the gate of friction in human design. And this gate is located in the emotional solar plexus and has a lot to do with our relationship dynamics and conflict. And I say that because I've noticed, like, this is some of where I've had to do my work of like deconditioning, because I do carry an open emotional solar plexus. So the areas in which you are opened, they're the ones that are just more susceptible to conditioning. So it's no coincidence to me that when I start to actually show up differently in relationships, then my body goes through like this sort of metamorphosis process. I think I used that word correctly. I'll do that often, guys. I'll say words that I think fit in a sentence, and maybe they don't, maybe they do. But yeah, I can think back to, I believe it was this, yeah, it was the end of summer of 2021, where I was having this moment of recognizing what it means to have freedom in choice in how I take care of my body. Like on a physical level, I've had a history of being diagnosed with different types of immune issue disorders, autoimmune issues, and things like that. And so I sort of was having a conversation with my mom, and I took this moment to like say, this is the way I'm going to relate to what's happening in my body. And I kid you not, I went into a fever that very same night, and was probably in that um sickness, we'd call it, like I was sick for almost like almost a whole month.
Wow. That's so interesting because, like you said, you made the choice to relate to it differently.
Yeah.
And it just makes me think of how everything is relational, like how we're relating to what's happening in our lives, how we're relating to other people, how we're relating to ourselves,
Mhm.
our challenges, our struggles. It's something I probably need to sit with a little bit longer, but I feel like this was coming up as I was reading the sixth gene key. And to go back to what you were saying before about deconditioning and going through your Saturn return and all of that, it kind of made me wonder whether the deconditioning process, I mean, we're calling it deconditioning, but in a way, what's coming up for me is like, it's just awareness. It's becoming aware. It's like awakening to
Mhm.
who we really are. And I've
Mhm.
been wondering whether, as you were speaking, I was wondering whether this process has been happening kind of before we even discovered human design. Because, like, I suppose I would say my self discovery journey started maybe 5, 6 years ago now. I can't remember exactly when, but um, I wonder if that's really where the deconditioning started. And then it's just layer upon layer upon layer as we discover new parts of ourselves, and human design is like a system that can make things very clear,
Mhm.
can show you very clearly, like, this is how you were designed to be, who you were designed to be. And so, like, the loss of identity, or even just the relating to our own sense of self and identity, has shifted as we've become more aware of these different parts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But it really speaks to me, like if we were to like broaden it out, because you're right. Like I don't think that all of a sudden when we learned human design, we're like, oh, like now we're deconditioning. No, I
Now I
don't
know
think
who
it
I
is.
am. Yeah.
Right, right. Because I think that anything that takes you down a path of self-discovery, you will ultimately be coming across a deconditioning process.
Mm.
Because it makes me think of like, especially how um for example, like the sixth gate is coming out of the emotional solar plexus. And I think about how, and it has a lot to do with like the nervous system. It has to do with feelings, emotions, passions, like our desires, maybe some other things. But ultimately, when we think about this center, we're thinking about our emotions. And I can reference some times where, or like anybody who's learned about different traumas or who has read the book the body keeps the score, essentially like what's happening is these emotional wounds that we go through, because that was something that was talked about in the sixth gene key. I don't remember if you remember, but he's basically said like we've created our defense mechanisms essentially between the second 7-year cycle, which is between 7 and 14. And then those are the ways in which we are reacting or behaving towards our relationships with the world then as an adult. And in some way, this is the same thing that you can find in the psychology world, the self-help world. There is a true psychological understanding here that this is sort of what's happening. And I think how, we are holding on to these wounds or these ruptures or these moments that sort of got kind of get left. And let's say you just go to therapy and you open that wound up and you kind of look at it a little bit more. Then as you're doing that and you go through this process, or if you read a book and the book sort of like hits on this one little part here, and now you start to like reflect on it and you bring more awareness to it and you shed some light to it a little bit more, maybe you're not going to respond the same way. And I think that anything that takes you out of doing something that you've done just because for so long is deconditioning. It doesn't just have to happen through like human design.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, bringing awareness to a pattern, whether or not you want it to be something that's playing out in your life, bringing awareness to it can help you to change it. Yeah. So let's maybe talk about what the different frequencies are of this. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
So we've got Gene Key 6, or the gate of friction in human design. We've got the shadow of conflict, the gift of diplomacy, and the Siddhi of peace. And like we were saying, there's kind of a theme of defense and defensiveness, and this is really the shadow frequency of where we kind of have our defense mechanism. And would you agree?
I think it could be like the shadow being conflict. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the repressed aspect and the reactive, one is the repressed is people pleasing and the reactive is sort of just like bursting out all of your emotions out into everyone and everything else outside of you. And for those of you, I think we typically will share if Hannah or I have this defined.
Oh yeah.
And I actually do. So, and I wanted to ask you something. Do you think that if something is defined in the design side of your chart, so if you're looking at a body graph, then you're going to be looking at the left side, and it's some like there'll be two different colors, whatever chart you're looking at, but the design side, from my understanding, is said to be the unconscious side. And I'm going to think then it's also relating to the body. Is it also relating to the body?
Yeah. So the design is the body, like the vehicle, I think. And then the personality is the personality, the spirit, the conscious side.
Conscious side.
Yeah.
Well, because then it's like, so I have the sixth gate defined in my design side in the first line. And it's governed by Jupiter. And we haven't really talked about planets, but I was just kind of like looking over and reading it because I found it very curious. And Jupiter is sort of like this planet of like expansion. That's how I've come to learn about it. And um, how I tie this together into like part of the story that I've experienced. Because in the circuitry workshop, remember when we like kind of looked through what was defined and sort of we're seeing a story.
Yeah.
To like here to share with you, like I see like a whole nother story because I have had issues relating to like my immune system, right? Like I know that the spleen is also what governs the immune system, but also our like emotional life is also very much correlated to like our immune function. And they say that the solar plexus, I guess, is also relates very much to the pH in the blood, which this is where the sixth gate sits in the emotional solar plexus. So my point in sharing all of this is that most times, or like the one big time I remember, like when I was diagnosed with lupus, I was 15. And at that time, life was like a little rough. I, my family and I, we were dealing with someone in our family going through alcoholism, addiction. And I'm growing up in my teens at this time and kind of experiencing all that. And this moment happened where I just was becoming physically not well, couldn't move, was having all these symptoms, didn't know what they meant. And the doctor had asked like what had been going on in my life around that time. And I shared with them, and wow, sorry, some things just kind of click as you talk.
Yeah.
But basically what I'm saying is that they asked and they said, well, they say that it's in my genes somehow, like it was present there, like the markers, or I don't know, I was very young to try to interpret all this information, was a lot. But one of the things I do remember them sharing with me was that the stress that I had been engaged in was like the straw that broke it, that really unleashed all of the symptoms and brought them really to the surface. And I say that because it's very interesting how it all sort of correlates. Like the six gene keys specifically, and where it sits in the emotional solar plexus and how it's related to conflict. And I didn't read this book, like I didn't know about the gene keys, until fairly recent. So in some ways, it's just like a really beautiful tool to bring as to bring into like help with the self-reflective process, into the contemplation of like, whoa, like what are these things that are going on in my life? I don't know, kind of felt like I just went on a tangent there, but yeah.
It kind of create an understanding or giving a little bit of meaning perhaps to some of the experiences that we've had in life that sometimes we can't make sense of. Perhaps it gives a little bit of extra meaning.
Yeah.
And you made me think of a realization that I had just this last week, because on my other podcast, I recorded an episode about my journey with holistic health and healing, because I think I shared previously, I've had over the years a lot of chronic neck pain, and issues with physical, what I would say is a physical manifestation of stress and anxiety. because, and I've come to through going on this kind of journey of trying different modalities and trying different treatments and ways to heal the pain, to heal chronic pain, I've come to find that it's always been things that have helped me to relieve stress, which have actually helped to relieve the pain the most. They've been the most effective. So things like meditation and things like energy healing or different, I mean, I've tried so many different things over the years, but the realization that I had was that the pain started at a time where I started to really abandon myself and my
Mm.
emotions and how I was feeling. And I definitely feel like there was a correlation there between like this disconnection that I had with myself and what my heart was really telling me and how I was really feeling. And then I ignored it because I didn't want to, I was people pleasing actually.
Mm.
I didn't want to let people down. And so I'll just tell you like specifically what happened. Well, I was in a long distance relationship with my now ex-husband, and I was living interstate for work. And it was at that time that I moved back home. I just lost my grandma. So I was going through the grief of that and feeling guilty for not being there when she passed away. And then I was also feeling guilty because I think I knew deep down that the relationship that I was in was incompatible and that I wasn't really, like, my heart wasn't in it. But I felt guilty because he'd waited for me. Like, I'd been working interstate and, he'd kind of waited while I was doing all that. So, but my heart was telling me, like, I'm not really in this, right? And so I think it was at that point that I started to self abandon. And from there on out, I was just playing out this dynamic of people pleasing because I didn't want to let anyone down. I didn't want to let that relationship down. I didn't want to let my family down because of the expectations of, there was other things like my career. My heart wasn't really in the job that I was in, but I was just kind of going along with it because that's what everyone expected me to do. So yeah, I kind of had this realization just in the last week as I was reflecting on the journey that I've been on in really healing my health, which is still, I mean, it's a process. Like, I'm still not, I
Mm.
wouldn't say I'm healed at all, even though I don't experience chronic pain anymore. I still do get tension. I still get pain from time to time. And then there's all kinds of other like health things like we've been talking about here through this process, through this journey. So, I mean, I just share all this to say that I think personally, the inability to feel and to honor my emotions really did
Yeah.
then manifest in physical illness and physical pain, which has
Mm.
been, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily change it because it has been such a deep learning journey that I've had to go on to really
Yeah.
decondition so much of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's something when you were speaking, I was like awareness,
Mm,
like, which I know that you and I bring up and we talk about and we throw it in, but it's especially true when we're talking about our emotions
mm,
and the emotional waves that we can go through, like you and I, and like the last couple of weeks, if just bringing attention to the fact that, like, whoa, like you said it today, like what'd you say? Life is like a ride, or what? It's
it's a roller coaster of emotions.
roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah.
We checked in right before, and you said like it's a ride, and I'm just like,
Oh, right.
it
Yes.
is, it is, because you know, one day you're like in one mood, feeling one thing, and the next day you're the next. And I think it just brings to the quality of learning to not stay um, so attached to our emotions,
Mm,
recognizing them as, I like to say, they're like messengers of information. And, you know, if not for like bringing awareness to how we are feeling, then we do have responses like people pleasing
Mm.
or like projecting all of our shit onto everything else around us. And the,
Or being
you know, like,
overreactive and
right.
yeah.
Um, and it's funny because I was reading the Six Gene Key and I I came to this part where it said something about people who experience um sort of the, the gift frequency of diplomacy have this sort of like ability to be able to know when is the right time to say something or to kind of engage in that conversation or into the conflict, what's happening in a really open and honest way. And it's so funny because the way it was worded made me laugh because that's something that I've learned like from my mom. One thing that I will take, I thank her and will take forever is this saying of like, there's a time and a place.
Mm.
And I had just recently, as a family, we've been going through some things. And I had that in my mind. Like, I know I need to like say something. I know there's something I want to share about how I've been feeling about something. And if not for the ability to carry like this gift in diplomacy, because I do feel like um it is a consistent energy that I can relate to. I mean, yeah, it's in my unconscious, it's in my body, so in my design side, but it's very much present in the way in which I relate to people. And I finally came to a moment where I was able to have this conversation with my mom, and it was like really beautiful and it was really nice. And we both came to it open and honest. And, I'm just like, gosh, so grateful for that. Like, but really, like, that's part of this gift frequency of diplomacy, diplomatic, whatever you want to call it, like that there is a way in which that we can address things that do bring conflict that don't add to like the volatility that our emotions can bring sometimes. And if we sort of like slow down a moment to have this awareness of like, okay, this is what's coming up for me, this is how I'm feeling, kind of bringing some really compassionate inquiry to like what's happening within you. I think
Mm.
that's sort of what leads to being able to have diplomatic conversations and experiences with other people.
Mm. It really makes me think of the emotional wave that people who
Mhm.
have an emotional authority have to go through. So, in order to get clarity to be able to make informed decisions or perhaps the right decisions for them. I mean, this isn't my authority or yours, so I
Yeah.
don't know how that feels to have to go through that process, but it makes so much sense talking about emotions and talking about, like you say, waiting for the right time. There is a right time and a place. And you think about like in a period of or in a conflict with someone, you might say things that you don't actually mean because you're speaking from that place of emotional volatility. But if you kind of wait and allow yourself to feel the emotion and to calm down and to come back a little bit more to from a place of clarity, then you can still have that conversation and still express how you're feeling, but it's going to have a lot more, it's going to land much better with the other person if it's not coming from that really kind of volatile place, I suppose. But yeah, it just made me think of that emotional wave and also the fact that I'm surrounded by a lot of emotional people. Like, and when I say emotional, I mean defined emotional solar plexus in human design. So I have to go back and check my parents. I don't exactly know what my parents' human designs are. I know for sure that my dad is a projector, and I'm pretty sure that my mum is a projector too, but I don't know her specific um, time of birth, and it says that she's either, like, if I've played around with a few different times, roughly around when I think she was born, and so she's either a projector or a manifestor, but the way she behaves is definitely a projector. um, and I mean, I say this with so much love, but I'm pretty sure most of the people in my family were emotional authority, meaning that they have defined emotional solar plexus, and then I'm completely open. I don't have any gates, anything coming out of my emotional solar plexus. So in a way, I mean, as since I discovered the term empath, I've identified with that. And then I heard about, I'm not sure if you know about this as in your work, in your line of work, but I heard of the term super empath the other day, and I was reading about it and I was like, oh yeah, that feels like me. So you not only just like sense other people's emotions, but you actually take them on and completely feel them yourself. And this is really something that I'm having to work through. And I mean, my husband Alex is a emotional manifester. My sister's an emotional manifester, and her husband is also an emotional
Oh, wow.
manifester. So when we spent some time together last year, when we went to visit them in the States, by the end of the week, we spent a week together. By the end of the week, I was feeling so emotional, and it only just hit me afterwards that I'm like, well, I'm being around all these people with defined emotional solar plexus. So there's no wonder that me, as a completely open emotional center, is picking up so much of that. And it's not to place any blame on anyone else for how I'm feeling. I mean, that's been something that I've kind of had to learn through this process of bringing awareness to this part of me, is that it's not about blaming someone else for the emotions. It's about recognizing, well, the emotion is there and it's just wanting to be felt and experienced. And so it's not about saying, well, like, this isn't mine because I'm open, so therefore they have to deal with their emotions, and I'm not taking responsibility for it. It's being like, well, no, actually I have the wisdom from my open solar plexus to see that the emotion is there, to feel the emotion. And so in a way it is taking responsibility for it, even if it's not mine in the
Mm-hmm.
first place, even if it's not actually coming from me. It doesn't even really matter. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter who it's coming from.
Yeah.
It's just an emotion that needs to be felt. So
Yeah.
that's
You
my
know,
observation.
I can't say if I too am surrounded or have a lot of people that have defined emotional centers, myself being open also, and
Do you know
having
what
just
Travis is?
Travis actually also has an open
He's open.
he
Okay.
does. And so what something that I've learned through working with human design is when two people have, if yeah, it's you're with two people and those same two people have an open emotional center, then it can be really supportive for them to actually like address what's happening in the moment right then and there, so that they can return to their like cool, calm, and collected. Because that's sort of how I understood it, is like people with an open emotional center kind of remain pretty like even keel, and then it's mainly that things like, picking up things from the outside world that revs up this like emotional thing. That's not to say that I can't have something from like coming from internally from myself that's making emotional. It's not to say that, but I will say that most of the time, like if I'm in my zone, if I'm in my flow, if I'm in my space, like not too much is really going to set me one way or the other. But that's not to say that that's not true, because like just the other day I woke up so moody. I mean, I'm waking up like I haven't even interacted with the world, and I was so like irritable, and I recognized it, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do what I need right now. And what I need is to get out of bed. And I went and I did like, instead of doing a meditation to like quiet my mind, because it wasn't like in my mind, it was more so like having this feeling. I was disappointed when I woke up, and I went and I'm like, all right, I just need to do like a morning pages style, like just a stream of consciousness of what's coming up for me. And I did that. And by the end of the time that I was writing, like I had kind of like felt and been with the emotion. Like that was my way of channeling out like that frustration that I felt in the morning. And I was actually thinking about like, you know, I think that really did me and Travis like a service, because
Mm.
how many of us, right, have just sort of woken up, been in a mood, and then kicked our partner while they were sleeping, or got up and just kind of like just been moody or reactive to things. And I'm happy that like in that moment I didn't like I didn't put that on him. But anyway, so yeah, he's also an open emotional, and I'll notice like it's really helpful, and it sort of has just happened organically too, where if something's coming up between the both of us, like we'll pretty much address it like
Mm.
right then and there, and we don't really like have to like we can't, what I'm saying is we really don't move on to the next thing until it's sort of like addressed and acknowledged, and not to say that we're coming to peace in that moment, but it's kind of been worked with.
Mhm.
And that's been really helpful for us.
Mhm.
So if anybody out there, you and your person, and you and anybody you're in a relationship with have open emotional centers, I encourage you to try it, because it
Mhm.
actually helps kind of work through that experience. And even if it's not right then and there, then having an understanding of like, okay, can we come back to this at some point in however near future or whatever, can
Mm.
probably be really supportive to two people who have open emotional centers.
Mm. And something I've been thinking about or trying to observe is when I do feel those moments of emotions, when I'm so, like you said, when you're alone, generally you feel pretty cool, calm, collected. But I have been noticing that I've had times where that hasn't been the case. I've been on my own, but I'm still feeling emotional. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
is kind of signaling to me that it's not something I'm picking up in this moment. It's something that's been repressed, that's like wanting to come up and wanting to be felt and experienced. It's like a repressed emotion. And I've had some really big emotions come up recently, particularly around, I think I told you, around like this manifestor wound of being afraid to be big, being afraid to
Mm.
like this big expression of myself. And I did a EFT tapping session the other day with someone who's also a trained reader, a human design reader. She's works in human design space as well, which was so helpful because she was able to draw in human design to also the modality of EFT tapping, which is emotional freedom techniques. And I mean, I'm still just kind of playing with the tool itself and experimenting with it, but yeah, I had some really big emotions come up in that session because she said a few little things that kind of, I mean, she wasn't trying to trigger me, but it did trigger this emotion because she said something about me actually being afraid of being this big manifestor. And I felt that. I was like, oh my gosh, like that is, and this is again, just another layer that I'm discovering about myself is that I didn't feel like it was safe to be this big expression of who I am. And that's also what I'm craving. I'm craving to kind of fully express myself. But I've felt like that hasn't been safe. And so now it's like these emotions are coming up when there is a bit of space, when I am on my own, so
Mm.
that I can feel it. And then, like, that's kind of the way through it. You've got to kind of go through it to
Yeah.
feel it, to heal
Yeah.
that, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm. And we, you know, I, I work with a lot of people who are experiencing what it's like to not be able to be with a particular emotion. And oftentimes it's this feeling of like being taken over by that emotion if you allow yourself to feel it.
Mm.
And it's really beautiful when you can see the process for a person, speaking for myself and my clients, when they'll try it on, they'll give it a try, they'll allow themselves to feel the feeling and then recognize that, like, oh, I'm actually not being like taken over by this experience. Everyone has a different experience with this that I'm talking about. But yeah, I mean, I just speaking for myself, like the example I just gave you of waking up and feeling this this disappointment, this frustration. I didn't like I didn't just like sit with it. When I think that sometimes, like, when we talk about like our emotions and like feeling it and sitting with it and being with it, feeling your feelings, like, I wonder if a lot of people think that that means like, okay, I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna feel this frustration. Feel
Mm.
like, okay, cool, maybe that worked for somebody, but that's not really like what I mean or what I think it's meant by that term. You have to find like the appropriate way to funnel out that emotional experience that you're having. Just for me, like, I had to like write it all out. And maybe at times it really is just sort of sitting there with like, you know, um and feeling it in the presence of another person, I think is really powerful too. Like, they give you that space to know that, like, okay, right here, you're safe, and that it's okay to feel this, and that like they see you. Um, and especially like when they speak the same language. I remember you telling me about this, and I think I brought this up to you. It's really nice when you can speak to somebody on like the same level of something, right? Like, she kind of like had this understanding of human design, and um, I think it's just really beautiful when two people can speak that same
Mhm.
language. It just feels like the experience is felt more.
Yeah, I think having someone who knows the human design system, and I'm noticing this a lot with different, because I am someone who likes to experiment with different healing modalities and to try different things. And I'm noticing that I'm seeing a lot more people with that kind of background as well. So they perhaps have some kind of qualification in a modality, and then they also have like a certification or some kind of trained experience in human design or the gene keys. And
Mhm.
it's like they can see you in a completely other level as well. Like, they can see who you are, or at least get an idea of your essence, who you are as a person, and then also bring in the tool, whatever it is that they're qualified to use to support you in healing. Or I guess it is just deconditioning again, just like,
Yeah.
yeah, like you, I mean, I just felt that emotion was so strong, and it is uncomfortable to feel, and I can understand why people are afraid to feel their feelings, because it's so uncomfortable. And it felt like my heart was breaking. Like, it actually felt like my heart, I felt it in my heart. And um but it passes as it's felt. Like, it's temporary, and it doesn't feel like it in the moment. It feels like this is never going to end, but it does pass. And
Mhm.
it made me think of when you said, like, sometimes it isn't just sitting with the emotion or being with the emotion. Like, sometimes the emotion wants to be felt or expressed in different ways. And
Mhm.
I mean, it just makes me think of how it's energy that wants to be moved, like, wants to
Yeah.
be moved, right?
Yeah.
um and so maybe it's like physical exertion, or some kind of like physical expression of that energy. I suppose this is where it can be helpful to have a number of different tools that we can draw on, and then we can check in with, like, how do I want to express this, or how am I being asked to feel this in this moment, whether that is journaling, or just sitting with it, or tapping, or doing a workout, or going for a run, or I don't know, breathing, doing some kind of breath work or
Mhm.
something. Like there's so many different tools now that we have access to support us to move that energy and express that energy.
Mhm.
Mm.
Mm. You know, as we're sort of like talking about what can come when you like feel your feelings, and it made me think of one of the other things that we, Hannah and I were discussing in taking like a break from recording, was that for a moment it almost, and I don't, we talked about it, like it almost, I didn't want it to come across that some of the things we talk about were like
Mm.
spiritually bypassing, or bypassing things. And I think that that's really a part of why we brought up the deconditioning part, and we can continue to talk about it because it's going to continue to happen and we can discuss it and shed light to it. But I say that because, when we go through the gene keys, like they give you the frequency, and here you and I are. And when this is sort of like what's just coming to me, is like we're kind of like going through this exploration. And honestly, in a quick way, like an hour is not that long when you give like the depth of some of these human experiences. And so we had a conversation in just sort of discussing that, yes, we can say that things are a tweak or that there is a shift to make, or you can see it in a different way. And it's not to like discredit the actual sometimes difficulty that goes along with practicing those things. And I also do think that it's important. Um, well, one, we talked about like vulnerability in our discussion around this. We talked about transparency. Um, and just being honest, which I feel like we do bring to the conversation. But it's funny because what I was thinking about as we were having this dialogue today of what it's like to be with our emotions and decondition and all this stuff, I was thinking of like, when you think about it, when we go through this, on the other end of it can be peace, which
Mm.
is the city of this energy. So I say that so that everyone knows, like, be acknowledged that it's a journey and that it takes some effort, and that, um, it's not always easy by any means. And so we just wanted to share that with you.
Yeah, and I think that you can experience peace or you can experience some of these higher frequencies while also experiencing emotional turbulence or anxiety or just all of
Impatience.
the spectrum of natural human emotions.
Right.
Exactly. And that's, I think, where we were at last week. We were feeling, so we recorded the fifth Gene Key episode. And then afterwards, we were like, it's really hard because in a way, we're kind of in it. Like we're talking about these things and we're trying to bring it together in a cohesive way and to also present this information in a new way that hasn't been presented before, perhaps. But then at the same time, like we're going through our own journeys of
Mm-hmm.
deconditioning. We're not perfect. We're not implying to be
Mm-hmm.
experts at all. I mean, this is our own self exploration journey that we're doing through this process. And so, really, I mean, our intention was to have a deep dive into the human experience. And that's what we're having in our own lives. And all this stuff's coming up. And perhaps it's being amplified because we're going through it. We're looking at it. We're bringing awareness to all these different things. So a lot of things are coming up for us. But we just want to, we just kind of want to remind everyone that we're on this journey too. Like
Mm-hmm.
this was kind of the whole intention of this podcast to begin with, was to share our experience as we're learning, as we're deconditioning. And
Yeah.
it's not always pretty and it's not always what you expect it will be. So
Yeah.
We just want to be as open and honest and transparent as we can be.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I hope that in our conversation today is brought you guys a sense of peace. I really do. And I share that because I feel that within myself of just having this conversation, not really knowing like what today was one of those days. I don't even know if we knew what we were going to talk about or how it was going to show up, and um, kind of went with it anyway. And um, the peace that I feel, I hope that it brings some peace to you.
Mm. And it's making me think of our signature sign as manifestors is peace.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully we can bring some of that to everyone else too.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you, Rafa.
Thank you. I'll see everyone on the next one.
See you soon.